Hello again, and welcome back to the latest episode of Your Story Corner, the podcast. Wherever you are, whoever you are welcome here to this safe space, designed and created specifically to help you relax and unwind. And if it's time, settle you down for a good night's sleep with a bedtime story. Thank you for streaming and downloading this podcast wherever you're listening to us right now from all around the world. We are so proud and so grateful that you've taken the time to listen to our little corner of the world. Thousands of downloads and streams around the world, and we are just getting started. So whether you are new to this podcast or you have watched us live on TikTok every other night from 10 p.m. UK time, we're glad you're here. The idea behind this podcast is very simple: to allow you to listen to some of the world's most famous and beloved stories from around the world. Created and designed to help you just relax, remind you to breathe deeply. To remind you that you are not alone. And no matter whatever is going on in your world, in your life, right now, remember, it will pass. It's going to pass. And you are going to be okay. You're gonna be okay. So now all you have to do is get comfy and cozy wherever you're listening to us right now. And if it is bedtime for wherever you are, hopefully you're nice and cozy and settled, ready to just put your device to one side, close your eyes, listen to the sound of my voice and the crackling warmth of the fireplace next to me. And as you close your eyes, I want you to bring the story to life. Paint the pictures in your mind. Now, today's episode, we're going to read some of our favorite fairy tales that we have been reading on our TikTok lives. And coming up very soon in an episode, soon to be completed, will be an episode focusing on some techniques on breathing and some techniques to help you feel calm and maybe work through some stress or anxiety that you may have to work through from time to time. And that'll be coming in a future episode, but look out for it. And of course, wherever you're listening to us, we're available on all podcasting streaming platforms. You can find out more by simply going to our website, Yourstorycorner.com, where you can listen to all the episodes directly, or click all the links to your favorite podcast platform. And there you'll find all our social media links as well. Remember, you can follow us on TikTok, on Instagram, on Threads, and X, and soon other places. So thank you for all your support. It means a great deal. And together we're finding more people around the world to help relax and settle with a good night's story. So now, settle back, get comfy, and enjoy another Story Corner. Here now are some of your favorite fairy tales as requested in our TikTok lives. And we start with the Frog Prince. Once upon a time, one fresh spring evening, a beautiful princess was strolling through the woods in the palace gardens, singing softly to herself. After some time, she arrived at a pretty pool and decided to stay a little while. The princess had taken her favorite toy with her, a ball made of glistening gold. Over and over again, she threw the ball up into the air, catching it each time with a smile. Her success made her confident, so she threw the ball into the air much higher than before. This time, the princess did not catch it, and the ball dropped to the ground and rolled straight into the water. When she peered into the pool, the poor girl found the water was so deep she couldn't even see the bottom. The ball was nowhere to be seen. The princess cried out, "My favorite toy! I would give up everything if only I could get it back somehow." As she spoke, a little frog hopped out of the bowl and asked the princess why she was so upset. "Why should you care, little frog?" she asked bitterly. "My golden ball has fallen into the water, and now I'll never get it back." The frog thought for a moment and then said, "If you promise to always love me and let me live with you in the palace, I will get it back for you. You would only have to let me eat from your plate and sleep on your pillow. You would not have to give up anything." Now the princess, thinking that the frog would never be able to follow her back to the palace, saw no harm in allowing him to fetch the ball. "Very well," she sniffed. The frog leapt into the water. When he returned, the frog spat the ball out at her feet and smiled. The princess snatched up her ball and ran off. Even when the frog called after her to remind her of her promise, she did not stop. The next evening at dinner, there was a telltale sound from the palace steps. Splish, splosh, splish, splosh. A knock sounded at the door, and a familiar little voice called out, "Princess, princess, open the door. Your woodland love can wait no more. Remember your promise at the ball. Your royal honor is the golden rule." The princess had forgotten the promise she had made to the frog, and looked at the king guiltily. "What is the matter, child?" he asked. Sighing, the princess replied, "Yesterday, a horrid little frog made me promise that he could live here with me if he got my ball back from the pool." "And did he?" asked the king. "Yes," said the princess quietly. "Then you must honor your promise, as the frog says, child. Let him in." The princess rose reluctantly from her chair and opened the door. Splish, splosh, splish, splosh. The little frog hopped to the table and leapt straight to the princess's plate. The princess completely lost her appetite, and when the frog had eaten his fill, he asked her to take him to her bedchamber. There she placed him on her pillow, and he fell straight to sleep. In the morning, the frog hopped back to the pool. The princess breathed a sigh of relief, but that evening, to her horror, a telltale sound came up the palace steps again. Splish, splosh, splish, splosh. Then there was a knock at the door. Princess, princess, open the door. Your woodland love can wait no more. Remember your promise at the ball. Your royal honor is the golden rule. That evening, the frog ate from the princess's plate and slept on her pillow again, then returned to the pool in the morning. On the third evening, exactly the same thing happened, but when the princess opened her eyes in the morning, the frog was gone. Instead, a handsome prince stood at the side of her bed, waiting for her to wake. "Where did you come from?" she asked in surprise. "Long ago, I was enchanted by a wicked fairy to live the rest of my life as a frog, until an honorable princess took pity on me. Unless the princess allowed me to live with her and eat from her plate and sleep on her pillow for 3 nights in a row, I would remain a frog forever. Now that you have broken this terrible spell," said the prince, "I would be honored if you would marry me and live with me in my castle on the other side of the forest." The princess was astonished, but very relieved that the king had made her honor her promise to the frog. She smiled and said yes, for she knew already that she loved the prince and would be happy to spend her life with him. After the ceremony, the princess's faithful servant arrived to take the happy couple to the castle on the other side of the forest. The princess said a fond farewell to her father, the king, knowing that she would be able to visit often, as he was so nearby. She set out for her new home with the prince who had once lived as a frog, and they lived happily ever after. The princess and the frog. Who else imagined Kermit the Frog in that part? Very different, of course, to the classic Disney movie, which is one of my all-time favorites, the music especially. But good to hear these classic fairy tales, translated millions of times all around the world, and told many different ways, but still as enchanting as ever. Talking of one which is very enchanting, and one that is very popular over many years, is the story of Hansel and Gretel. So if you're almost asleep, or ready for another bedtime story, get cozy and close your eyes and enjoy. Hansel and Gretel. At the edge of a large forest, a woodcutter lived with his children, Hansel and Gretel, and their stepmother. The family was very poor, and there was not enough food for all of them. The woodcutter worried what would become of them, but his wife was more practical and not very fond of her stepchildren. She told her husband, "In the morning, we'll take them out to the forest. They'll never find their way home, and things will be much easier." The woodcutter was horrified, but agreed to his wife's idea. He went to sleep with a heavy heart. Hansel and Gretel, who were too hungry to sleep, had heard the whole plan. Hansel knew he must act quickly, so that he and his sister could find their way home. He crept out of the house and gathered as many little white stones from the garden as he could carry in his pockets. "Don't worry, Gretel, all will be well," he whispered, and they slept at last. Before sunrise, the woodcutter's wife shook the two children awake, saying, "Get up at once. It's time to collect wood from the forest." She gave each child a piece of bread, and the family set off. As they walked, Hansel hung back from the rest, looking back at their little house. Each time he paused, Hansel's father urged him to hurry, not realizing that his son was dropping little white stones on the ground to mark the route they took. Once they were deep in the forest, the woodcutter sent the children off to gather fallen branches for a fire. They came back with their arms full of and sat warming themselves while their parents went to cut more wood. As the two children were so hungry and the fire was so warm, they started to feel quite tired and drifted off to sleep. The sky was dark when Hansel and Gretel woke up. The woodcutter and his wife still hadn't returned, and Gretel wailed, "How will we ever find our way home?" Hansel, however, was calm and took his sister by the hand. "Just look at how the little white stones gleam in the moonlight, Gretel, and shining on the ground. A clear path home." They walked all night, until they came to the house at the edge of the forest. Their stepmother was astonished to see them again, but the woodcutter was very relieved. He had felt so guilty that he hadn't slept a wink. Life returned to normal at the edge of the forest, but it was not long until the woodcutter and his wife were worried again. "We must take the children deeper into the forest this time," complained the woodcutter's wife. The poor man could think of no argument against her. The children, who heard her words, knew they must act quickly once more. But when Hansel went to the door, he found it had been locked, and the key was nowhere to be found. "Don't worry, Gretel," he whispered. "We'll find a way home again somehow." In the morning, the children were shaken awake again and given a piece of bread each, which they put into their pockets. The bread was so small, it was hardly worth eating. So, as they walked into the forest, Hansel scattered little pieces of his bread onto the path behind them. They walked deeper into the forest than ever before, and once their parents had left them, the children felt utterly alone. At lunchtime, Gretel shared her piece of bread with her brother, and they fell asleep. When they awoke, Sky was quite dark, so Hansel took his sister by the hand and looked for the breadcrumb patch by the light of the moon. If it were not for the great number of birds living in the forest, Hansel's plan would as surely have worked. But the birds had eaten every crumb in sight. Now there was no way for Hansel and Gretel to find their way home. The children walked all night and all the next day with no more than a few berries to eat. They began to worry that they might be lost forever. When they heard a pretty little bird singing, they stopped to listen. As it flew off, the two children followed it and landed on the small of a roof of a cottage. The hungry children went closer. To their surprise, the cottage was made entirely of sweets and cakes and breads of all sorts, with windows of clear spun sugar. "We'll have a feast," said Hansel, who broke off a piece of roof, while Gretel nibbled a window frame. While they filled their empty stomachs, a high-pitched voice interrupted their enjoyment. "Who is that gnawing at my house? Is it a little mouse?" Hansel and Gretel replied, "It's only us," and carried on eating, enjoying the cottage very much. The door sprang open, revealing an ugly old woman leaning on a cane. "Children," she squealed, "come in, my dears. You must be very tired. Let me give you a place to rest." Though they were alarmed by the woman's appearance, the children longed to have someone take care of them, so they followed her inside. They ate a delicious dinner and went to bed with their stomachs full. As they slept, the old woman chuckled, for she was not kind at all, but an evil witch. Before the sun rose, the witch pulled Hansel from his bed and locked him in the stables where no one could hear him shout. To Gretel she said, "Get out of bed and make your brother a big breakfast. When he's large enough, I'll eat him right up." Gretel wept and wailed for her brother, but had to do as the witch told her. Her brother ate a hearty breakfast, while she got nothing but scraps. Every day the witch would visit young Hansel to see how much larger he had become. "Stretch out your finger, little boy," she would order. Clever Hansel realized her eyesight was poor. Each day he stretched out a chicken bone instead of his finger, and the witch believed he was still as thin as ever. Weeks went by, and the witch could no longer wait for the boy to get larger. She lit the oven and ordered Gretel to climb inside to check that it was hot enough. Realizing that the witch intended to cook her up first, Gretel said sweetly, "But I don't know how to get into the oven." "Foolish child," the witch scoffed, and stepped forward to show her. And as soon as the witch's head and shoulders were through the oven door, Gretel gave her an enormous push and bolted it shut behind her, leaving the witch to roast. Young Gretel ran to set her brother free, and the two were overjoyed to be together again. They decided to explore the witch's house before they left for home, and what a fortune they found! The witch had hidden boxes of all kinds of jewels and coins everywhere. The children took as much as they could carry and set off through the forest. The longer they walked, the more familiar their surroundings became, until at last they spotted their house at the edge of the forest. When they saw their father in the doorway, they leapt towards him, weeping with joy. The woodcutter could hardly believe that Hansel and Gretel had returned to him. His wife had passed, leaving him all alone, and he had been very unhappy without his children. Hansel and Gretel laid out all the jewels that they had found at the witch's cottage, and laughed happily now that all their troubles were over. The end. Hansel and Gretel, of course. We've all been there, haven't we, at Christmas or Thanksgiving, eating a gingerbread house. Hopefully with not too many witches around. Our final bedtime story on this podcast episode is one of my all-time favorites. It's one I remember vividly when I was younger, which is why I enjoy doing Story Corner, reading stories that you may remember when you were younger, or being read to, or maybe you have had the pleasure of reading to younger members of your family. This is called The Elves and the Shoemaker. Once upon a time, there was a poor shoemaker who had only enough leather left to make one pair of shoes. He had no money to buy more, so he cut out the pattern pieces for the shoes he wished to make and put them aside until morning. The shoemaker lifted the candle stub he'd been working by and trudged wearily up the stairs to the little rooms he shared with his wife above the workshop. The next morning, the shoemaker opened the door to his workshop and gasped in surprise. There, on the table, was a fine pair of shoes, made from the leather he had left out. The shoemaker picked them up to take a closer look, and could not find a single fault. They were perfectly made. At that moment, the bell above the door of the workshop jingled, and a customer walked in. She urgently needed a new pair of shoes, and when she saw the ones in the shoemaker's hands, knew she had found just the pair. The shoes were sold in a flash, and with the money he had made, the shoemaker bought enough leather to make 2 more pairs. He cut the pattern pieces out that evening and went up to bed for a good night's sleep. The next morning, the shoemaker returned to his workshop, feeling refreshed. He was ready to work, but the 2 pairs of shoes had already been made overnight. The shoemaker had nothing else to do but sell the beautiful shoes, and this was quickly done, leaving him enough money to buy leather for 4 pairs. Once more, the following morning, 4 pairs of ready-made shoes sat on his workshop counter. These strange events continued until eventually the shoemaker was no longer poor, and customers came from far and wide to buy shoes from his workshop. One night, just before Christmas, the shoemaker made up his mind to find out who had been helping him. He and his wife hid behind a curtain leading to the workshop area and waited. As the clock struck midnight, two little elves ran into the room wearing not even a scrap of clothing between them. They clambered onto the counter and set to work making shoes. The shoemaker was amazed at just how well the little elves stitched and hammered. He could not believe how quickly they completed all the work before they skipped off into the darkness. The shoemaker's wife looked at him and said, "We must show the elves how much we appreciate everything they have done for us. I will make them both a little outfit, hats and jackets, to keep them warm." The shoemaker nodded in agreement and said, "And I'll make a perfect little pair of shoes for them both." When the shoemaker and his wife had finished, they laid everything out on the workshop counter instead of any cut-out pattern pieces. They then hid behind the curtain again and waited to see what would happen. As the clock struck 12, the little elves ran in and discovered their brand of new sets of clothes. They laughed and hugged each other in excitement. They dressed themselves quick as a flash, and danced and skipped across the counter and out of the door. The elves were never to be seen again, but the shoemaker's business continued to be a great success, and they all lived happily ever after. The end. One of my favorites. It reminds me of the Jim Henson Storytime series he did, and he did one. Was it Elvis and the Shoemakers? Very funny. That's the thing and the magic about books and stories. They can remind you of places of where you were and memories that you may have forgotten while enjoying a good bedtime story. Now, if you're not already fast asleep, I hope this has helped you settle, feel calm and relaxed. Remember, you can join us live every other night on TikTok from 10 p.m. UK time in the week and 10:30 p.m. UK times on the weekend. Thank you for all your support and enjoying this podcast. You can now also, if you prefer, listen to all our episodes on our YouTube channel. Just search Your Story Corner on YouTube or go to our website, Yourstorycorner.com. There you can listen to all the episodes and have all the links there waiting for you for all our social media, including TikTok, Instagram, Threads, X, and YouTube, with more coming, especially for our YouTube channel. But now it's time to tuck up in bed. So wherever you are, whoever you are, remember you are not alone, and it will pass. And you are going to be okay. Until the next episode, sleep well.